We're going to start in just a few minutes. There's still some people signing in. Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for taking time out of your weekend to be here today. Advancing democracy in the face of current threats could not be more appropriate to honor Minoru Yasui or more timely to address the current threats to democracy in this country. I'd like to make a special welcome to Consul General Yoshioka, Jennifer Galler and Emily Warner of the Public Law and Policy Program at the University of Oregon School of Law, Hideyasu Kurose, the 2023-24 Minoru Yasui Fellow at the University of Oregon. Oh, he's online, great. By the way, welcome everyone online. And the past Minoru Yasui Legacy Project Steering Committee members, June Schumann and Jessica Asai. And of course, special thanks to the sponsors and presenters who made today's program possible. The families of Shizuko and Masuo Yasui, the Chap Yasui Fund of the Gorge Community Foundation, the University of Oregon, the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, and the Minoru Yasui Legacy Project. I'm Sharon Maeda, and it's my honor to participate together today. Long before Min Yasui's brother married my mother's sister, he was a close family friend. The Issei first generation were close and were lay leaders at Epworth Methodist Church. The Nisei, Min, his brother Chop, and my father, Milton Maeda, even bought a car together, and they flipped coins as to who would have the car on a given Friday or Saturday night. And I might literally not exist today if were it not for Min's quick thinking. Mom and Dad were engaged when Executive Order 9066 was introduced by President Roosevelt. But her Hood River family was assigned to Tule Lake, and Dad was already incarcerated in the Portland International Livestock Building before moving on to Minidoka. Since the government hadn't yet figured out that Min was missing, he drove to Hood River, picked up my mother, drove her to the Multnomah County Courthouse to get a marriage license, and was Dad's proxy. He then drove Mom, her one suitcase, and the marriage license to the gate of the Portland Livestock Building. Thus, Mom and Dad made the front page of the Oregonian as the first couple to be married behind barbed wire in a whitewashed horse stall. Min later turned himself in to authorities. Fast forward to the 1950s, Min stayed at our modest house in the Albina district for weeks at a time to assist Portland families to file their evacuation claims. My sister and I were told that the makeshift upstairs bedroom, which is actually more of an attic, was off limits for us. Uncle Min was doing very important work, and we were not allowed to bother him or even go upstairs, which was normally our playroom. When no one was looking, we quietly went up and found nothing of interest to us elementary school girls. piles of papers on the floor all around the edge of the room, and a card table with more piles of papers. Decades later, Min confirmed that each pile of papers was one family's claim, and that they would eventually receive only 4.6% of the 1941 value of the property they lost. He also did this work mostly pro bono. I remember Mom and Dad arguing about how much money we could afford to give to Min to help support his family back in Denver. While he's known for Yasui v. United States, Min kept on working for justice his entire life, including being a longtime director of the Denver Human Rights Department. Today, in the lobby of a Denver City court building, the inscription under his statue describes him as an American of uncommon courage and principle. So fervently did Minoru Yasui believe in the rights guaranteed by the Constitution that he endured 9 months of solitary confinement to test the government's authority to discriminate against Americans of Japanese ancestry on the basis of race. Min would be adamant that advancing democracy in the face of current threats is exactly the correct theme for today, and his booming voice would implore all of us to take action. One action today is for us to take the little tags that are over on the table if you haven't received one, and write down how you are going to advance democracy. These tags are reminders of the tags that 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were forced to wear with just a number to identify themselves. Take your tag to the reception at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon following this program. They will be hung next to the replica of Min Yasui's historic jail cell. If you are unable to attend the reception, we'll collect them and take them over for you. Those of you that are online, write what you will do to advance democracy and post it on your refrigerator, bulletin board, or bathroom mirror, something that you will see every day. You might want to write what you're going to do after you hear from these compelling speakers. First is our keynote speaker, Representative Khanh Pham. And to introduce her is Peggy Nagai, who was the lead attorney in the Min Yasui Coram Nobis case, and many other things which I won't get into. We were business partners a while back.
Thank you and welcome. So who is the Honorable Khanh Pham, State Representative for Oregon House District 46? Why is she Oregon's first Vietnamese American legislator, elected in 2020, re-elected in 2022, and now running for State Senate District 23? She is the daughter of parents who left Vietnam in 1975. She grew up in both Oklahoma and Irvine, California. A Lewis and Clark graduate, an organizer who learned by working for the Labor Community Strategy Center in LA, where she rode buses daily to talk about transit racism and environmental injustice with low-income Black and Latinx riders. Grassroots fundraiser and community organizer in the Bay Area, who made regular visits to Vietnam, witnessing the growing impact of stronger hurricanes, severe flooding, saltwater intrusion, extreme heat. In Portland, Representative Pham worked at APANO, the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, building their environmental and climate justice program. Became the founding leader for the Portland Clean Energy Fund, where she achieved a $750 million climate investment plan for low-income communities and communities of color. With that accomplishment, she saw another Oregon was possible: renewable energy, transportation decarbonization, green infrastructure, regenerative agriculture, climate jobs. In 2020, she declared her candidacy to represent Southeast Portland, the Jade District, championing an Oregon Green New Deal, strengthening democracy, fighting for people over profits, advancing environmental justice. Among Representative Pham's many legislative triumphs, she serves on the House Climate, Energy, and Environmental Committee to win one of the most aggressive clean electricity standards in the country, with energy affordability to establish a low-income rate class. She helped pass the Trees Act, investing $7 million to increase Oregon's tree canopy. She helped pass the Coal Act, divesting Oregon from coal investments. Representative Pham is the leader to untangle the environmental mess of my generation. I really hope you do that. Is the leader to fight for a more just and livable world so that her 9-year-old daughter thrives. A leader who is willing to take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one she must take because it is right, as Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. said. And activist Grace Lee Boggs, quote, "We need to discern who we are and expand our humanness and sacredness. That's how we change the world, which happens because we will be the change," close quotes. Representative Pham is the change. From her humanness and sacredness, a leader with the courage to advance democracy in the face of current threats. Please welcome Representative Pham.
Thank you so much, Peggy, for those kind words. And thank you to the Minoru Yasui Legacy Project for inviting me to be here today. I am so deeply honored to be able to speak today, to share a little bit more about the work and legacy of Minoru Yasui, and to offer some reflections about some of the lessons that his work and career had hold for us today. So first, I wanted to share a little bit about Min Yasui. I really appreciated the opportunity to research more beyond what my textbooks taught me, which was nothing. So Min Yasui was born in the United States in 1916 in Hood River, Oregon, in a time of intense xenophobia. So he grew up, he was born to immigrant parents in Hood River, and this was a time, as I mentioned, where there was just intense anti-Japanese hatred. There was no Jap signs, and even though he graduated with honors from both the University of Oregon and the University of Oregon Law School, he even passed the bar, becoming the first Japanese American member of the Oregon State Bar. He still could find no work in any law firm in Oregon. And so later, when Pearl Harbor was bombed in December of 1941, he sought to serve in the U.S. military. He was a junior ROTC member on his college campus, and when he graduated, he was actually a commissioned second lieutenant upon graduation. But he was, again, rejected because at that time, unless you were already in the armed services, all Japanese Americans were considered enemy aliens and forbidden from military service. In late February of 1942, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which authorized the Secretary of War to prescribe military areas from which any and all persons can be excluded. And that led to the entire West Coast being designated a military zone, and led to the forced removal of all people of Japanese ancestry to internment camps, and issuing travel restrictions and a curfew on all people of Japanese descent. So this was a real turning point for Min Yasui. As someone who had studied and deeply valued and believed in the U.S. Constitution and the values of equal rights under the law, he felt so strongly about the need to really challenge the constitutionality of this order. And so, in coordination with others, he became the first Japanese American to consciously defy the curfew as part of a coordinated legal strategy aimed at really challenging the constitutionality of both the curfew and the internment order. As a result of his defiance, he spent 9 months in solitary confinement, awaiting his appeal to this U.S. Supreme Court. And ultimately, when he lost the appeal, he was sent to Minidoka concentration camp in Idaho. But despite losing his legal case, what I really found so inspiring was that Min Yasui never gave up on continuing to advocate for legislative redress for Japanese Americans. And decades after, he continued to advocate not just for Japanese Americans, but as Sharon was mentioning earlier, he was advocating for the civil rights of all oppressed communities: Black, Latino, Indigenous communities, other Asian American communities, and really any community facing discrimination and violations of their civil rights. I found in my research that he has an unpublished memoir where he wrote, "If we believe in America, if we believe in equal democracy, if we believe in law and justice, then each of us, when we see or believe such errors are being made, have an obligation to make every effort to correct such mistakes." I want to repeat this again because it is so powerful and I think offers us inspiration in this moment. If we believe in America, and if we believe in equal democracy, if we believe in law and justice, then each of us, when we see or believe such errors are being made, have an obligation to make every effort to correct such mistakes. I was raised as a Vietnamese daughter to honor my ancestors, but ancestors are not only bound to us by blood. I believe that ancestors also include those who have bravely championed their values and worked for a world of justice for future generations. And that is what Min Yasui is to me. Thanks to Min Yasui and similar pioneers, my Vietnamese refugee family was able to come to the United States and gain the right to education, housing, and employment in the United States. And I stand before you today as the first Vietnamese American legislator in Oregon, which is a real testament to the tireless efforts of Min Yasui and other activists. So for me, Min Yasui is an ancestor that I think all Vietnamese Americans should claim, and really all Americans. And I wanted to share a little bit about what Min's legacy means to me and some of the lessons that his life holds for us today. So a little bit about myself. As Peggy was mentioning, my parents came here as refugees in 1975 after the fall of Saigon in the US-Vietnam War. Like Minoru, I was the first to be born in the United States. And I was born in the late 70s, grew up in the 80s, and it was a very reactionary time to be growing up in small town Oklahoma. When my parents first arrived in the US, a nationwide poll revealed that a majority of Americans were against resettling Vietnamese refugees. They were afraid of these new refugees taking away their jobs. This was the late 70s, where there was sky-high inflation, and people were just really afraid of the economic recession and just the economic impact of accepting newcomers. But despite these challenges, many communities actually did open their arms to Vietnamese Americans. And thanks to the civil rights victories won by Min Yasui and others, we were able to pursue education and choose our neighborhoods to live in and contribute to the economy through small businesses that we started that continue to enrich our society today. 40 years later, we're continuing to build our voice and power as a community, which, so in 2020, when when I was approached by my community to run to represent House District 46, it had never had an Asian American representative, even though we include the J District, which is one of the highest concentrations of Asian Americans in the state. So despite having never had Asian representation, we wanted to build that power. I'd never done that before, and so it was a huge leap of faith. But thanks to the support of my community, some of whom are here in this room today, I took that leap, and we're still continuing to build today. At that time, there were no Asian Americans in our legislature, but by my second session in 2023, we were 6 strong. This progress, along with the diversification of judges and other community leaders, really marks significant strides in representation and leadership for our diverse communities. So the US has been on this long road towards becoming a truly pluralistic, multiracial democracy that embraces diversity. And yet these advances are also being met with a backlash. On December 21st of 2020, just a couple weeks before I was set to be sworn into office as a legislator, we had far-right activists storm our Capitol. And in fact, some of them actually even got in, or rather they were let in by a former legislator. And if it weren't for our security cameras and the quick thinking by some of our security guards, they would have likely entered our legislative chambers. And I shudder to think what could have happened. Just 2 weeks later, on January 6, 2021, in Washington, D.C., on the other side of the country, the insurrection did happen when thousands of rioters stormed the Capitol seeking to overturn the results of the presidential election. And many of them made it into the building, threatening the lives of hundreds of our congresspeople and ultimately leading to the deaths of several people that day. And yet that same month in January, I and 5 other Asian American legislators were sworn in as the largest contingent of Vietnamese American legislators of any state legislature in the country, along with the largest contingent of BIPOC legislators of color in Oregon's history. So these advancements, as well as the backlash, highlight the crossroads that the United States is in right now, and the constant push and pull of advancements and retrenchment. Throughout our history, there have been struggles over who is considered to be a true American, with the full rights and protections accorded under the law. Min Yasui's fight was just one in a long history of struggles. Today, there are people who want to assert a sanitized, whitewashed version of our country, one where people of color, LGBTQ people, and immigrants are dehumanized and considered less than American. They mythologize a false America that never existed, and they decry all the efforts for diversity, equity, and inclusion in our schools, in our books, in our media, and in our government. So the fight for democracy really touches every aspect of our lives. And democracy is not just about voting in our elections. It's about creating a space where every person, regardless of their background, has a meaningful voice in shaping policies. At the state level, we've been able to pass legislation that expands voter access and deepens civic engagement, particularly for marginalized communities. In 2021, we passed HB 3021, which required that our online voter pamphlet statements be translated into the top non-English languages spoken in the state. I want to honor Secretary of State Cheryl, who's here, as well as my former Chief of Staff Robin Yee, who were critical to helping to pass that. We also, this past session, won campaign finance reform to help address the corrupting influence of money in politics in Oregon. And in policies ranging from environmental justice to childcare to economic development, we have diversified the voices of who is able to shape those policies to ensure that the communities that are most impacted are truly engaged. And yet we have still so much more work to do to advance democracy here in Oregon. Here in Oregon, over the last few years, our legislature has struggled with near constant walkouts almost every session, which have shut down our legislature, sometimes temporarily and for a few days, and sometimes for the entire session. Unlike 46 other states in the country that require a simple majority to do business, Oregon has one of the highest quorum requirements in the country, which means a tiny minority of legislators, just 10 senators out of 90 legislators, can walk out if they don't like a bill, and it effectively can shut down our government and prevent us from passing any policy, any budget, or doing any of the work that our constituents need us to do. Our situation is a microcosm of what we're facing at the national level, with the Senate filibuster and the Electoral College and lifetime tenure for the Supreme Court, which are essentially skewing our democracy away from majority rule. So now, after decades of increasingly lopsided empowerment of a small minority and decidedly undemocratic outcomes, millions of Americans today don't even think that their vote counts. They don't feel like they have any voice in our democracy. So they've essentially given up and dropped out, or they've been pushed out of engaging in our democracy. Right now, a presidential candidate can win the popular election by millions of votes and still not win the presidency. In a handful of states, by simply purging their voter rolls and disqualifying predominantly Black, Indigenous, and people of color voters, can swing an entire election. So we are at a crossroads, and our democracy is at stake. We now have a situation where prominent politicians are talking about carrying out the largest domestic deportation program or operation in US history. And they're talking today about setting up mass detention camps. Project 2025, which the Heritage Foundation put out, is a blueprint for how to use the executive branch to attack the agencies and offices responsible for carrying out civil rights law, as well as the ones supporting the development of renewable energy or environmental protection, and rolling back reproductive rights and LGBTQ rights at a national scale. More than 20%, in a recent poll, more than 20% of Americans today believe or agree that patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. Other polls have similar results, saying 1 in 5 Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, believe violence is justified if the other party wins the election. So I did not start out as a democracy activist. As Peggy mentioned, I spent my adult career focusing mostly on environmental and climate justice, fighting for an Oregon Green New Deal and green jobs and a livable planet. But increasingly, over the last couple of years, I have focused my legislative agenda increasingly on democracy reforms. And I've also just started talking more about the importance of protecting and defending our democracy, because I've come to realize that a functioning democracy is a prerequisite for any of the good policies I want to have. If we want to pass bold climate action, if we want to protect reproductive rights, if we want to hold corporations accountable through economic justice policies, we cannot allow a small minority of politicians to just walk out and shut down our entire government. I've learned that we in the racial justice movement, in the economic justice and reproductive justice movement, we have to become a pro-democracy movement. So what lessons does Min Yasui have for us today? And what are the lessons we can learn from his example? I only have a few thoughts. I'm looking forward to hearing from the panel. But I would say, first of all, not all of us can become lawyers and try court cases up to the Supreme Court, but all of us can do our part. Whether we are, wherever we're located, we can stand up for equal rights and taking a stand against injustice and any attacks on our democracy. And it may come at some personal cost, and that's what Min Yasui has taught us. So whether it's in your workplace or your place of worship, with your neighbors or at your school, every person in this country needs to be reflecting on what moment we're in today and talking to our neighbors about the kind of community, what kind of issues we're facing, the threats, and also what our vision is for the world we want to build. It also means getting involved with a group and supporting campaigns that are aligned with our values. We live in a time where it is so easy to retreat behind our smartphones and other technology social media platforms, but we have to fight back against that isolationism. And building community is a powerful act of resistance. A second lesson I'm learning from Min Yasui is to know your history. I never thought I'd hear another presidential candidate talk about rounding people up in detention camps and carrying out mass deportations. But here we are, and we've got to be clear-eyed about this moment that we're in. And learn from our history, the history of what happened 80 years ago in the US when Min Yasui was arrested and the country was swept up in a racist mass hysteria. They hold lessons for us today. We can learn from those who are able to resist and build organizations and movements of resistance to protect and advance this imperfect but precious democratic system that we have today. And lastly, I think one of the most profound lessons I'm taking from Min Yasui's legacy is to practice hope. It's easy to look around the world today, just like I imagine Min Yasui must have been looking around his world in 1942, and to feel like things are looking pretty bleak. There are so many terrible things happening in the world today right now. It is easy to sometimes despair. But Min Yasui's determination reminds me that history is full of examples of people who are facing what looked like insurmountable odds, but who were ultimately able to succeed as a result of years of tireless work by people who had the courage to imagine a different world. So whether it's engaging a family member, a neighbor, a coworker, or joining a new group, change starts with each of us making time to vision and reflect with one another about the world and changes we dream of. This is how we practice hope. This is how we're going to build a better world for future generations so that we can be good ancestors to future generations, just like Min Yasui has been for us. Thank you.
Wow. Representative Pham, after you get elected and serve in the Oregon Senate, maybe you should think about going to Washington, D.C. and helping in the House or the Senate there. Powerful, powerful comments. Next, we're going to have a panel discussion, and I'm happy to introduce the distinguished panel that we have today, a very diverse panel coming from different areas of engagement. Emcee Herzfeld-Copple is a respected leader driving inclusive democracy organizations and campaigns throughout the Pacific Northwest. She is the executive director of the Western States Center. She began her career advocating for LGBTQ+ rights at the age of 14 in Idaho. Now think about that. Emcee is known for her commitment to an inclusive democracy, policy advocacy, labor organizing, award-winning journalism, and serving as the executive director of the then Idaho Human Rights Education Center and co-executive director of Basic Rights, Oregon. You can clap. Rebecca Asaki is Director of Organizing for Tsuru for Solidarity's Immigration Detention Organizing and Direct Action Work supporting children and families. Excuse me. And prisoners and detention campaigns. Becca has been 15 years of organizing experience empowering tenants, workers, immigrants, and AAPI community members, focusing on issues such as fair compensation, housing, legal representation, reproductive health care, and language rights. She's based in Brooklyn, New York, and is a Yonsei, a descendant of those who were incarcerated during World War II. Becca has actively participated in initiatives like the New York Day of Remembrance Committee. And thirdly, excuse me, it's allergy season. Paul Sushi is multifaceted artist and social worker, from being a peer resource navigator to the Portland street medicine, connecting people living outside with medical help, to leading conversation projects for Oregon Humanities. He also runs a mutual aid project assisting with lost IDs and birth certificates. Not stopping there, Paul is bringing an adaptation of the Iliad to prisons in Oregon and the East Coast, while writing a book on immigrant identities and lost graves, set to be published this fall. Paul? So each panelist will make a presentation, and after that we will have questions from the audience. And those of you that are online can also submit your questions electronically. Thank you.
Great. Happy to. Hello? All right, it's working. Well, thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you so much for our keynote speaker for those great words. As Sharon mentioned, I'm here representing Tsuru for Solidarity, and so for those of you out there who don't know who Tsuru for Solidarity is, we're an organization of Japanese Americans who are survivors and descendants of survivors of the U.S. concentration camps during World War II. As Sharon mentioned, I'm a Yonsei. My grandparents and their entire families were incarcerated in the Pinedale, Fresno, Hart Mountain, Tule Lake, Jerome, Rower, and Fort Missoula camps. So all over. And we, are a direct action organization that understands the history that we come from, right? So driven by our survivors who were children during when they were incarcerated with their families, to make real the promise of reparations, right? The promise that our community made that we would fight for reparations, not just for ourselves, but so that this wouldn't happen to any other community again. And to, I think, our horror and fury, we are seeing the repetition of history, the repetition of forced removal, the repetition of mass incarceration, of family separation, and of exclusion and deportation. Repeating, this was history that predated what happened to our community and is continuing on afterwards. And we understand that we have a moral obligation and a moral legacy to uphold, right? That if what happened to us it was a shameful stain on this country's history, then the targeting of immigrants today is the same. And I think that we really understand that the conditions that allowed for the mass incarceration of our communities are repeating as well, right? So the same rhetoric that was used to target our communities, I mean, it feels horrible to repeat it, but I think it's important, right? That the rhetoric that we were a threat to national security, how many of us have heard that, right? Tons of that rhetoric is being repeated. That we were an economic danger to people who were living in the US, right? How many people are hearing that, right? That there's a scarcity of resources and that immigrants are now, right? The ones who are an economic danger. People also talked about us as an unassimilable race, right? As a group of people that could never actually be a part of this country fully. Okay. Has anyone heard anything like that, similar, right? Like this rhetoric is repeating. And then, so we really see it's important for us as a community to not just speak out, right? We think it's very important that we speak out. That's why I'm here. But it's also very, very important that we take action against what we are seeing as this repetition of history, right? Sometimes in the exact same locations that our community was incarcerated on, the same land is being repurposed into detention centers for immigrants. And it is happening under many administrations, right? Family detention actually started under the Obama administration. I think that's important to mention. But obviously, things are escalating at this point. And so, you know, as a part of Tsuru's work, right, is that we really feel that in order to live out this legacy, right, of standing up for what is right and standing against the forces that target communities of color, that target vulnerable communities, is to put our bodies on the to the front lines, bring our bodies to the front lines to actually push back against this repetition of history. So I just came back from Seattle, where there is continuing right now a 3.5 week long encampment outside of the Northwest Detention Center. And so the Northwest Detention Center is it's an adult detention center and it's kind of the regional detention center where folks that they're picked up in Portland, in Seattle, all over from the border also will be brought there. And Japanese Americans have stood for weeks now outside of this detention center to say the conditions inside of this detention center are no different from what our families experienced, right? So my family, you know, would talk about how undrinkable the water was, right, at the detention centers where they lived. That's exactly what people are experiencing in right now, right? That the food is inedible. My great-grandmother was in the hospital in Jerome in Arkansas, and she got horrific medical care, absolutely horrific medical care, and she ended up dying in that detention center. There are medical emergencies that are happening at the Northwest Detention Center daily. You know, the people that are held in Northwest Detention Center, in fact, all immigrant detention centers are held there indefinitely. There is not you're serving out a sentence, right? You're held indefinitely. And that's what our families experienced as well. They had no idea when they were going to be released. And so the people that are inside NWDC are fighting back, right? The reason that we had this 3.5 week long encampment there is because, you know, Charles Leo Daniel, a man who was in solitary confinement inside of Northwest Detention Center, died. He died by suicide, and what we believe to be suicide. And there was no, and continues to be no, accountability for that death. And what it revealed is, you know, these horrific conditions that we knew were really bad, that we knew were bad. We knew were very, very bad. We now know that they are deadly, right? And so this escalation that we are seeing in the rhetoric, in the treatment of immigrants at the border and inside of detention centers like this, is a repetition of history. And it's important for us as Japanese Americans to speak out, to organize alongside organizations and community members who are pushing back against these kinds of policies, and to leverage our moral authority, right? To say to our elected officials, who, you know, we met with our state, the senators from the state of Washington, to say, like, this is unacceptable, right? In a democracy, this is not how we treat people who come to this country. It's not. And we can speak to, from our experience, how detrimental that is on an individual level, on a community level, and generationally, right? I'm 2 generations removed from this detention center, and I still weep outside of these detention centers because I imagine my grandmother inside. That's who I'm there for. It's for my grandmother, because I know someone's grandmother's inside there because I saw them walk out. I saw them be brought in an ambulance and brought into a detention center in a wheelchair. It's unacceptable. Sorry. Like this, when folks were sharing, Min's quote, right? Like, if we love this country, right? I'm 4th generation in this country. Like, you fight for what you love, right? And you fight for what is right, and that is what we are trying to do. And it gives us an opportunity as Japanese Americans to return to these detention centers and to fight on behalf of communities who are directly being targeted now in the ways that we wished that people had stood up for us in 1942, right? And to not just do it at the ballot box, so that's important, right? To not just do that, to our friends at dinner, like, ugh, this is really horrible what this person is saying, but to go out and put our bodies on the line and to go into the halls of Congress and to say, this is unacceptable, right? And I think, and to go to the media and say, look, this thing that, you read, farewell to Manzanar. Okay, well, Manzanar's happening right now. So what the heck? What are you going to do about it? And so I think, and it gives us an opportunity also to heal alongside with our comrades in this fight, so that they are not feeling alone, right? We felt really alone. Really alone. And so if we are trying to be the folks that are outside the fence that we wish that our family members had seen, we get to heal alongside of those folks who are being isolated and think that they're out on their own, right, fighting this fight. When in reality, right, there's a lot of people in this room, right? And we have the opportunity to do something different this time. We have an opportunity to build something different. I mean, I was there with Barb, these past couple of weeks, and it was beautiful what we were able to build. It was beautiful that we were able to hold ceremonies each night and honor this person who had died and honor the people who are inside fighting like heck. I mean, there are hundreds of people inside of this detention center who were on hunger strike. Hundreds of people. And then Japanese Americans joined and said, okay, you're on hunger strike, I'm going to go on hunger strike. Because that's what our community did in Tule Lake when they were in the stockade, is they went on hunger strike. Right? So we were like, we actually want to fight as hard as you're fighting inside for your freedom. We want to fight on the outside just as hard. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it was incredible, right? And we think that this was the first time that Japanese Americans went on hunger strike since we were incarcerated. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful and empowering, and we were able to take back the power that was ripped from us when we were ripped from our homes and from our schools and from our farms, from our offices. We get to reclaim that by standing alongside those who are under the gun right now. I could go on for forever, but I know there's lots of other folks on the panel who are also gonna speak to this. But I think that's what I would say as kind of a call to action. I mean, it's a short trip up to Seattle, but in general, how are we standing up and being the allies that we wanted to see? How are we transforming what we are hearing? And pushing back against the rhetoric that we know is deadly and dangerous, and to be the friends and allies that we wanted 80 years ago. And that way we can interrupt it.
Thank you, Becca. Thank you for your testimony. That was amazing. I want to share a little bit about Western State Center's work, offer a little context about historic and present white nationalism and anti-democracy organizing in Oregon and the region, and share some examples of how anti-democracy groups are mobilizing right now in the state. And then before I bum you out too much, and with some examples of inspiring and effective resilience. So that's what I have in mind to share. Western State Center is a 37-year-old nonprofit organization based in the Pacific Northwest and Mountain States. We work to strengthen inclusive democracy nationwide, really taking regional action for national impact. Our programs span 4 core pillars: building movements, developing leaders, shifting culture, and defending democracy. We really focus on rapid response and narrative shift work, mobilizing broad constituencies to address rising authoritarianism, and equipping the pro-democracy, the growing pro-democracy field with innovative tools, and supporting communities on the front line, democratic institutions, and local government to manage the threat of anti-democracy movements, right? We're now at a point where it's managing the threat of these movements. And, you know, white nationalism is really a cultural and political movement that, you know, can't just have a law enforcement response. It needs all levels of civil society, right, and creative interventions to close space for increasing political violence and bigoted movements. Western States also facilitates a number of cohorts and leadership networks in the region for cross-sector leaders who are seeking to deepen their analysis and tools to counter white nationalism and anti-Semitism. That includes a regional local anti-hate leaders network that we convene, the Northwest Racial Equity Leaders Community of Practice, and annual fellowship programs for organizers. We also have a core program area called Momentum, and that's the program where we monitor anti-democracy and bigoted social movements in our region to help communities and institutions push back. We offer a lot of trainings and briefings for community partners, elected leaders, and lawmakers around the tactics and goals of white nationalist and anti-democracy movements active in our region. And we have a number of tools that I'd encourage folks to check out, including a graphic novel on January 6th that asks the question, what if the insurrection had been successful? And includes an education and action guide, a community guide for opposing hate, a number of toolkits focused on how democratic institutions that are on the front lines of responding to white nationalism can face that threat robustly. We have a Confronting White Nationalism in Schools toolkit, now in its 3rd edition, one focused on libraries, and another for parents and caregivers on how to address conspiracy theories when they come up at home. And I'm so moved by the conversation today because another part of, I think, Western State Center's work is serving a little bit as a movement memory catcher. So we have a new historic memory project called No on 9 Remembered that looks at the 1992 anti-LGBTQ ballot measure in Oregon and how the both targeting and resilience in that moment has a lot of parallels to increasing political violence today. We also have hard copies of all of these toolkits. So if folks want any of these toolkits, just hit me up. We have an office in Southeast Portland. So I want to share a little bit about sort of why Oregon and the Pacific Northwest has been a proving ground for white nationalists and white separatist and anti-democracy movements for more than 4 decades and even longer than that. I also want to just share a little, establish a shared language, right, and get really clear about what we mean when we talk about both white nationalism and use anti-democracy as a frame. So white nationalism is a social movement, has a goal of building political power to create an all-white ethno-state. It is distinct from the historic system of white supremacy, right? Because it is a political and social movement. It formed after the civil rights movement as a backlash to equity gains made by Black Americans and other marginalized groups. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theory and fear of demographic change sort of forms its ideological core, and it also relies heavily on all forms of bigotry, including racism, anti-immigrant bigotry, Islamophobia, misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia. And I also want to be really clear about our analysis of anti-Semitism. You know, anti-Semitism is a centuries-old racialized form of bigotry. It serves as a template for hate and really an accelerant for anti-democracy organizing. It's the ideological core of white nationalism, and it's also the foundation for a lot of modern forms of bigotry. And that's because it's such a powerful prejudice, right, that can show up as unconscious bias, but it also maintains structural oppression. It's the ultimate conspiracy theory, right, that can adapt in periods of uncertainty and fear, societal shifts toward greater equity. It always offers a shadowy other with a sort of supernatural control and a predatory nature, and that's part of why it is such a threat, a profound threat to American democracy. And it is underestimated, including by our own justice movement. So at this point, we feel like it's not just a matter of what anti-Semitism is and defining it. It's about recognizing how it functions so that we can maintain our solidarity alliances and prevent wedges. And then when we talk about anti-democracy movements, we mean movements that are fundamentally opposed to a democracy that represents everyone. That doesn't mean that they don't engage with democratic processes. A significant tactic of anti-democracy groups is trying to take over democratic institutions or exhaust and undermine local government. We know how Portland, was really targeted by out-of-state anti-democracy actors during the Trump administration, right? These movements are seeking to delegitimize local government and sometimes replace it with their own authoritarian worldview. So again, these groups often engage in disrupting the function of democratically elected government in order to discredit it while bolstering the appeal of authoritarianism. Conspiracy theories play a really critical role in these movements, right? Reinforcing bigoted narratives, providing an alternative explanation for how power is exercised, i.e. not democracy. And it also helps to accelerate recruitment to movements, and they certainly rely on threats and intimidation. We use anti-democracy as an umbrella term, sort of for the big tent authoritarian coalition that includes groups like the Proud Boys, the Patriot Movement, the broader alt-right coalition. There are some anti-democracy groups like Greater Idaho, an active secessionist movement right now, that while they may not be white nationalists explicitly, they certainly don't reject white nationalists who want to join their effort. And we've used it for years because we feel like it also helps to shift away from ideological or partisan frames and focuses on values. A little bit about our region. Again, we know our region is the result of exclusion by design. We've talked about many of those laws and history today. By the 20th century, our region was really fertile recruiting ground for groups like the Ku Klux Klan. And after the KKK was widely discredited, fascist groups like the Silver Shirts, which were headquartered in Southern California, saw a lot of recruiting success in Oregon and the Northwest. And as the civil rights movement won major successes, some who cast themselves as white supremacists, they wanted to sort of refashion their image as American patriots. And that included a successor group to the fascist Silver Shirts called the Aryan Nations. And that's how the Aryan Nations moved to North Idaho, right? This was a group that decided that it was time to plan for the societal collapse of the U.S., that the U.S. was too far gone with civil rights advancements, and they were looking around for a region that they thought had favorable demographics. I also like to remind folks that ours is one of the only regions in the country that has defeated white nationalism with the dissolution of that Aryan Nations compound in North Idaho in 2000. We still see lots of anti-democracy movements active today in our region, many who sort of cloak racist rhetoric and conspiracy theories. They draw some boundaries, against neo-Nazis. It may not be explicitly racist, but certainly are part of that long thread of separatist movements. One example is the American Redoubt. That movement focuses on a region of Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, and Eastern Washington. Anti-democracy figures within that movement advocate relocating to the region to build political power and create a Christian nationalist state. Its founder, James Wesley Rawls, has a history of anti-Muslim animus. And it's very popular among paramilitary circles. The Redoubt movement includes its own media outlet and radio show. A couple trends in anti-democracy organizing. Some groups that are active here include the People's Rights Network, which is founded by Ammon Bundy. In 2021, People's Rights expanded to more than 50,000 members in 35 states, really leveraging the pandemic as a significant opportunity to mobilize. It's loosely organized in each state in our region, and I think it's noteworthy that last year People's Rights purchased a nearly 3-acre compound in Crook County, Oregon, which is where the next ballot measure vote will be on the Greater Idaho Secessionist measure. There's also an increasingly active coalition of white supremacist groups in the region called the Northwest Nationalist Network. They formed in early 2023. They're really focused on public demonstrations as well as racist flyering and targeting pride festivals and LGBTQ inclusive events. The network includes groups like the Evergreen Active Club, the Rose City Nationalists, the Cascadia Nationalists, and Northwest Front. I also want to focus a little bit on trends. So we know that a significant trend for anti-democracy and bigoted groups in Oregon is the targeting of libraries, schools, arts organizations, and local government. Last fall, a Beaverton City Council meeting was disrupted by a caller using racial slurs during a public comment section. Last summer, the Tigard Public Library canceled a drag queen story hour due to a wave of threats. Anytime there are those cancellations, they're celebrated by anti-democracy groups. In August, the Rose City Nationalists targeted the Oregon City Children's Theater, bombarding the nonprofit with phone calls after the theater decided to lend space to Oregon City Pride. And those attacks resulted in Pride changing the location of their event, which was a smart move because it threw off protesters. We also work with Pride organizers across the region to help them manage targeting and engage broad support and close space for political violence. And it's been really inspiring to see over the last few years, many small towns across our region have some of their first or second Pride festivals in small communities with record attendance and, safe and joyous experiences in spite of targeting. And we worked with the North Idaho Pride Alliance ahead of their targeting by Patriot Front and Coeur d'Alene to document their strategies in a Protecting Pride guide that we reissue every June with new learning. And then, of course, there's vandalism and flyering and white nationalist propaganda. This is a really common tactic. It's designed to intimidate communities by sort of making these groups appear larger than they actually are. And of course, it has a chilling effect with the end goal of silencing leaders. But we've seen, in spite of examples of flyering all over the state and region, also really impressive responses. So Springfield and Eugene, Oregon have experienced, a spate of anti-Semitic flyering in the last couple years, but often groups like CALC and Surge and local neighborhood associations respond quickly with counter-flyering and door-knocking campaigns with messages of love and hope. And while Patriot Front, a white nationalist group, engages in a lot of vandalism of racial justice murals in our region, we helped to document that so that the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law could bring a successful civil suit against them. And then one last example of anti-democracy tactics in Oregon is the attempted takeover of institutions, which we've largely seen in local GOPs. For example, the Clackamas County GOP vice chair is one of Oregon's most prominent Proud Boys. His name is Dan Tooze. And in Deschutes County, the GOP chair is a member of Ammon Bundy's People's Rights Network. Is anyone keeping track of time? I feel like I'm probably over. Someone wave at me. I'm going to give a couple examples of some effective pushback. One of my favorite examples of pushback is from Tillamook County, where the Tillamook County Sheriff responded to the Goyim Defense League, which is an anti-Semitic group. They often drop flyers in communities. There were GDL flyers left under the windshields of every car in a grocery parking lot. And he issued a citation for every single one of those flyers, because even though there wasn't a civil rights law that he could find that was violated, there was a local ordinance that you couldn't put something on someone's car without their permission. So I like that example because there's often existing law to hold these groups accountable. It just takes political will. In Baker City and Newport last summer, local organizing and accountability campaigns led to the resignation of both mayors after they'd expressed deeply bigoted rhetoric. And there have just been so many examples of joint civil society and elected leader actions and statements to help, sort of erect a moral barrier ahead of flashpoints. Statewide business leaders pledging to unite against political violence, municipal and county resolutions, denouncing these groups. Sometimes, feels like statements are symbolic, but I do think that they help establish a baseline of political agreement and can often lead to training and more concrete action. Cities denying park rally permits to groups with a history of political violence and courageous civil litigation, right? Ammon Bundy was run out of the state of Idaho because the state's largest employer, St. Luke's Health System, filed a successful civil suit against him. We've seen lots of effective lawsuits since Charlottesville and January 6th, too, to prevent folks from running for office who participated in those events. So I'm sure I'm at time. I don't know how I couldn't be. I'm going to wrap there and hand it over to Paul, and then we'll stand by for questions.
Wow. Thank you for that. It's an honor for me to be here. I appreciate being here. I'm not sure if this is on. Well, I'm a classically trained actor, so
Oh my God.
I don't necessarily need. Hello. Okay, here we go. Thank you. My name is Paul Susi. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a Portland native. I am not here representing any organization. I deeply appreciate the perspectives of these. I feel like I'm the intersectionality guy here. Prior to the pandemic, I was a homeless shelter manager for transition projects. I ran 6 different shelters in 5 years. I've been an outdoor school site supervisor where my camp name is Badger, and I was in charge of 136 graders a week and a dozen staff people, and I didn't sleep for 6 weeks. It was great. My current day job is for Portland Street Medicine, where I'm a peer resource navigator, helping folks living outside get connected to stabilizing care. Not an ER, not long-term care, stabilizing care. What does that mean? We don't even really know. We live in a country where our healthcare is very, very broken, as we all know. And as I'm listening to the panelists and the speakers, and I find myself really wrestling with my patriotism. I have a lot to resent. I'm the son of Filipino immigrants who fled an authoritarian dictatorship in the 80s, and now that the son of that dictator is back again, right? And history has a habit of rhyming right now, like the detention centers. that are now being revived, and the same tactics that we supposedly outlawed generations ago. They keep returning like a bad zombie movie. And one of the more recent homeless shelters, the Bybee Lakes Hope Center, is actually the never opened Wapato County Jail, Multnomah County Wapato Jail, that was built with millions of dollars of taxpayer money in the 90s, and then they never had the budget to open it as a jail, and it also wasn't necessary. It was part of the criminalization of America, and so in an act of unintended poetic irony, they turned that jail into a homeless shelter. Far away from services, far away from the communities. This is the city that works. This is Multnomah County, where this work matters. And so I wrestle with that every day. And as I listen to the meta perspectives, right, the patterns that have been here for a very long time. Governor Sylvester Penoyer in 1889 was elected on the campaign slogan, "Keep the Mongolians out," right? Like, this is deep in the DNA of this state. So how do we as individual humans, separating the Americanness, separating the immigrant identity or the native identity or whatever identities, how do we as humans live in community with each other in a meaningful way with clean consciences? And to me, that centering the question of our shared humanity is where I have some hope. Because as a homeless shelter manager, I had to make unpopular decisions, and I had to exclude people. And the racial epithets that were thrown at me were all of the racial epithets. The racists are not particularly discerning in their racism, and nor are they particularly imaginative. And then it becomes, but if I can get this person to see me as Paul, if I could know a little bit more about the context of this person, then even my analysis of them as racist starts to fall away. My analysis becomes, oh, you are deeply traumatized, and you have these unaddressed mental health issues. You have these unaddressed housing issues, substance abuse issues. This isn't racism. This isn't hate. This is hurt. You're hurt. Hurt people hurt people. And so when I can boil it away from the partisanship and the rhetoric and the oppressive statistics, if I can boil it down to what are we doing here in this moment right now? How can we affirm our humanity to one another in this moment right now? We're not going to get all of our needs met. I don't have housing for everybody in my back pocket, right? But it's possible to say, here's a bus ticket, or here, let me get you to talk to somebody who can help you replace your lost ID, or let me help you, I don't know, let me help you get to the other shelter around the corner where you're not excluded from, right? It's tactical now. It's purely about the day-to-day and the moment to moment for me. I'm running a mutual aid project where I'm helping people replace lost IDs and birth certificates. When I was a homeless shelter manager, this was the biggest, most frustrating part, the inane Kafkaesque bureaucracy of every mayor since Frank Ivancy has had a 10-year plan to end homelessness in Portland, but none of them has ever actually had to navigate the Byzantine systems that we have in this city for getting help to people. It's incredibly siloed. And the one thing that all the silos have in common is that you have to have your ID. You don't even have to necessarily be a legal immigrant. You just have to have some form of ID. And a person could spend years getting clean and sober, getting first and last and a security deposit, getting their health needs met, getting a job, getting their employment, getting their custody of their kids. They could do all these amazing and Herculean things. And then they get to that final sign on the dotted line so that you can get a lease to your studio apartment. And if you don't have your ID, that years of work and saving and investment goes out the window, and you have to start at ground zero all over again. And who here has lost their wallet and gone, you know, it's a pain in the ass to get everything replaced, right? Now imagine you don't have your birth certificate. Now imagine you don't have your mortgage paperwork or your lease paperwork, right? You have no way of proving to anybody that you are who you are. You know who you are. I know who you are. But so that the project I'm running, I'm a notary in Multnomah County. It's really satisfying. I use 15th century technology. It's a rubber stamp. And that rubber stamp lets me tell Florida, hey, give Jeffrey his birth certificate. And Florida says, okay. It's really satisfying. Anybody can be a notary as long as you're a resident of that county. You take a $60 course online, a couple of hours, you pay another $60 for a fancy rubber stamp and a cool notebook, and then you too can help people replace their lost birth certificates. It's over $500 to replace a lost visa. It's every birth certificate in the union has a different different application fee, which is part of why the agencies don't like to budget for this, because you can't have a consistent budget byline for this, and nobody's a notary in a homeless shelter. So it doesn't matter if you were born outside of Oregon, you're not going to get your birth certificate unless you can convince somebody at Wells Fargo or me to show up with their rubber stamp. So all of which is to say, to me, advancing democracy, yes, it's about the trends. It's about paying attention to the statistics. It's about showing up at these prisons and expressing our moral outrage. And it's about expressing our humanity, our shared humanity. Not necessarily even our patriotism, not necessarily our Americanness, it's our humanity. The sooner we can get away from these, like ancient bell hooks calls it, the white supremacist, imperialist, capitalist patriarchy. It's all intersectional. So if we keep trying to address just one of those things, the other three will keep biting us in the butt. And that's why we're in the moment we're in. But if we can answer that toxicity with love, with acts of love, and seeing one another for who we really are, hearing one another's stories, seeing past the hurt, that to me is the hopefulness, the opportunity of real democracy. It's not just voting, it's listening. Yeah, that's it.
What a tremendous cross section of information. I pride myself on being a journalist and being up on things, but I've learned some new things myself today. And the fact that only 300 miles away in Seattle, we had no idea that the Capitol in Salem was also attacked the week before January 6th is just appalling. And Portland and Seattle even have sister television stations, so it wouldn't be that hard for that information to be shared. But obviously, it was not. We've never heard anything about it in Seattle. So, I mean, there's just so much. I'm not going to take any more time. We have questions. Do we have questions from the audience? Or somebody is going to hand me some questions that might be coming from the internet? Do we have any questions? Comments? Yes. You want to stand so we can all hear you?
Thanks for that question. We've increasingly seen elected officials and candidates echo white nationalist talking points and express bigoted conspiracy theories. So I think it's really important for local communities to make sure that there's some accountability when that happens, right? Sign-on statements, rallies, these all help to close space and help to hold those elected officials accountable. I think that's a big piece of it. Also, finding organizations that you feel like you're aligned with, right? I mean, sometimes the enormity of what we're facing, especially in an election year, right, when I know all of our anxiety and the charge is raising, again, being in community, right, is an act of resilience, and finding organizations that are actively, working on equity. This work happens on two fronts. It's not just countering white nationalist and authoritarian movements. It's also creating equitable conditions in society, right, and investing in inclusion initiatives. So being a part of organizations that's doing that work is also powerful. And starting where you're at, right? If you're part of a school community and that school community is targeted with bigoted flyering, right? Helping to convene conversations and take actions. A lot of our toolkits are focused on, within a specific community, right? Whether that's your neighborhood, your library, your education community. Here are scenarios that we're all facing, right? That sometimes folks are you're just paralyzed, right? You're just sort of caught flat-footed. But there are, specific actions that that everyone can take to, help, preserve the life of a community or a school or a democratic institution. I think others on the panel could speak to that too.
Yeah, I think I'll just add on maybe something small. I really liked what you said about, you don't, actively organizing for the things that we want to see in our society is a major blow to the folks who want to build the opposite, right? And the more that we can do that work before they start showing up at council meetings or at your libraries or, I think the better, right? Like we get to build something different. I think it's one of the things that I really appreciated about our most recent action is like we built so much together, and it became fun to be at this encampment, right? Like we had taiko drums, we had people singing, we lit candles together, we fed each other, we, got to know one another as we're observing ice and geo, like through binoculars, right? We built something very different than what was there beforehand. And, it is the thing that keeps us safe, right? We talk about like we keep each other safe, but like our relationships to one another, what we have built in our community, and we bring people together around a positive vision of the world that we want to see, right? So when we say things like, we want disinvestment from, detention centers and from, militarization at the border, right? It's because what we really want is like investment in schools. We want housing. We want parks. We want people to not go hungry. We want a healthcare system that works, right? That's what we want. And so fighting proactively for the democracy and the society that we want, then that is the stalwart against the white nationalists and forces.
We always say that backlash is better with friends.
Paul, did you want to add something?
And have fun doing it.
Yeah.
Find the joyfulness of the work. A, because you got to take care of yourself, and B, because it really pisses them off when we have a good time.
Okay, because we're running a little bit late, unless there's another burning question, I'm going to move the agenda forward. All right, we're going to have a little fun here. Mari Hayman is the granddaughter of Dr. Homer Yasui, who is the youngest brother of Min Yasui. And she's going to present a very short film, award-winning film that she and her cousin Caleb Haas just premiered at the Seattle Asian American Film Festival a few weeks ago. So, Mari?
Thank you to all of the panelists. You were incredible. As Sharon said, my name is Mari Hayman. I am the granddaughter of Homer Yasui, who is the 8th of 9 Yasui children, Nisei, born in Hood River, Oregon, to Japanese immigrants, Shizuyo and Masuo Yasui. Min died, Minoru was the 3rd son. He died when I was too young to remember him, but I was lucky enough to have my grandfather for 41 years. So he died last July when he was 98 years old. And he was quick-witted and funny and kind of a joker to the end of his life. Very committed to fun, very much self-effacing, especially in light of his extremely accomplished older siblings, coming after Min. What can you possibly do? So he'd always say, well, it's better to be lucky than to be smart. That was his saying that he would repeat often. And I would argue that, yes, he was a lucky man. I think he was pretty smart too, but he would brush it off and say, oh, I was so dumb. He especially talked about during his incarceration in Pinedale Assembly Center and then later in Tule Lake. He was 17 years old when he was forcibly removed from his home with his family in Hood River, Oregon. At 17, he was sort of, oh, I'm away from my family, I'm not being supervised, I can smoke, I can chase girls. So he would just talk about, oh, that was such a good time. I was like, well, that was pretty dumb. I shouldn't have felt that way. And I think he realized throughout the course of his life that he was, in fact, he and his family members and other Japanese Americans were the victims of a great injustice, and he was a lifelong learner who decided that, okay, my task in life now is to teach other people about what happened, and he made it his goal to pass it on. Passing it on is kind of a big slogan for my grandfather, to pass on to our family the legacy of what happened during World War II, but also to share with the rest of the community what Japanese Americans endured, and to make a point of highlighting similar repetitions of history, including during 9/11. And in his mid-90s, I would say he was about 96, he actually went to Northwest Detention Center and stood outside and protested in his 90s in quite cold weather conditions. And he was really happy to be there. And he said, well, if I can be here, anyone could be here. So he was quite an activist right up to the end of his life. So I just wanted to share that about him. And as for the film, it's about Matsutake, which doesn't seem particularly thematic in terms of the theme of advancing democracy. But I think it's sort of a symbol, just as my grandpa wanted to pass on these, the legacy of fighting for your rights and standing up for when an injustice happens, he also wanted to pass on things that made us happy to be Japanese American, things that brought him joy, and food was one of the greatest joys of his life. Matsutake are pine mushrooms that grow in the Northwest, and you'll see, it's explained in the film, it's a very short film. It's a delicacy, especially in Japan. And so his family, he began hunting for these mushrooms after his adulthood, even though it was something that many people had as a hobby in Hood River prior to the wartime incarceration. He started to do that with my grandmother afterwards. And this film will give you sort of an idea of his spirit, of his lust for life, his big personality, and I hope you all enjoy it.
I was remiss on one thing. Would the panelists please give us a website or an email or a contact of how you can be reached? After all, we need to organize, right? So Amy, Becca, Paul, can you do that? So she's saying Western States Center. Make sure the states has a plural. It's states, plural. westernstatescenter.org. Okay.
Yeah, you can go to Tsuru for solidarity.org. So Tsuru is TSURU, the word for FOR, and solidarity.org. There is also a specific page for the Northwest Detention Center fight, but we also have a fight for Black reparations and our healing justice work as well, along with our work to shut down child detention centers as well. So, yeah.
There will be light. Paul.
I'm just a one-man band right now. You can email me at paul.susi@gmail.com. Of note, I am remounting an Iliad. It's touring to Oregon State Penitentiary and to Coffee Creek this May. In 2018 and 2019, this production, it's a one-man adaptation of the Iliad by Dennis O'Hare and Lisa Peterson, and it's a script. It's a modern adaptation, and it's myself and the cellist and composer Anna Fritz, who was one of the founding members of the Portland Cello Project. She's really cool. She plays her cello live in each of the prisons that we go to. We went to over 30 prisons and places of worship and theaters all over Oregon in 2018 and 2019, and then remounted it last spring when the 6th graders at West Sylvan Middle School were dealing with rage issues in their classrooms, and their teacher taught them the Iliad as a way of working through some of that trauma. And they found out that their outdoor school teacher had done an Iliad a couple of years ago, and they were like, we need Badger to come do an Iliad. So that's how we remounted an Iliad last year, and now we're going back to prisons again for the first time since 2019. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. It's Homer. It's Homer. It's the Trojan War. It's based on Robert Fagel's translation of the Iliad, of Homer's Iliad. And I'm going to spoil the ending for you. It's all about our ancient addiction to rage. We as human beings, men and women, everybody, all identities, we are addicted to rage. And what do you do? How do you let go of that addiction? Homer even was like, this is the central problem of existence. Like, my theory is that Homer was a soldier who did terrible things and had terrible things happen to him, and he didn't know what to do with himself, so he started writing poetry. He invented epic poetry as we know it. So that's a thing, by the way, that you could do to advance democracy. Invent epic poetry. And it's a blueprint for like all of these different ways of facing unbearable things. And what do you do after that? I'm kind of just filling time right now. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's incredible. I want to go read the Iliad again. Or actually, for the first time, I actually haven't read it yet. I just wanted to share my website, and in case you wanted to sign up for email lists from my account, you can go to my website, confamfororegon.com, or also go to if you just Google rep.confam, and you can sign up for my legislative updates, and also on my campaign website, there's year-round events, updates about what I'm doing out in the community. And I am trying to seed more of these conversations about democracy in every space I'm in. So I would love to stay in touch.
remembrance of Homer and the Yasui clan, but I happen to remember a time when one of his older brothers, Chop, would not let anybody who was married into the Yasui family to know where the special family hiding place was for the Matsutake. And he would even drive his pickup up one dirt road and leave it there. And then we came by in another vehicle to pick him up so that he would have his neighbors think that he was over there when we're really over there. So it's quite a tradition in many Japanese American families, but the Yasuis had a special situation. You could see how many matsutake they were getting. I mean, that's like phenomenal. So, moving on, next we have Julian Toda Curry, who is the chair of the Student Contest Committee, and she will now announce the winners of the contest. Julian?
Great, thank you, Sharon, and thank you again, Mari, for sharing that wonderful Matsutake video. I think, really thinking and seeing that video too, multiple generations going mushroom hunting together. It's really beautiful and really speaks to something close to my heart right now, which would be the student contest and really thinking about that next generation coming up. So I feel very honored today to talk about the Minoru Yasui Student Contest. Advancing democracy, as we've heard today, is vital. It's necessary and cannot be done without involving the next generation. So that is exactly why our student contest exists. I've been involved with the contest for several years now. The contest was actually founded in 2018 by Holly Yasui, Min's daughter. And her vision was really to educate and activate young people, the next generation of our leaders, about her father's legacy of justice. The contest since then has grown and evolved over time, pivoting during the pandemic and flourishing into an art contest last year in honor of Holly's passion for the arts. So this year's contest theme, like today's event's theme, was Advancing Democracy. We asked students in this contest, what does an ideal democracy look like to you? What are the challenges to achieving your vision for democracy, and what can be done to overcome it? Obviously, this was no easy task for any of us, but our 26 contestants grappled with that complexity and nuance and ultimately produced some amazing results. Some of you have probably seen some of the examples. We have actual art pieces back here if you haven't had a chance to take a look. So I'm excited to also announce, I think some of our students are here today. If any of our student contest members are here today, could you just wave or raise your hand? Oh, yeah, there we are. Yes, great. Wonderful. Thank you for being here. I think also, is Violet West here today? Violet is here. Violet, could you stand up? Violet was our junior division winner for last year's contest. Wonderful. Great. So I am first going to announce some honorable mentions in our student contest. Like I mentioned, we had 26 great contestants this year, and the quality of all of the art pieces and statements that the students submitted was very high. And we do want to give some honorable mentions to these students in the junior division. Alice Georgia Dorn. Alice is a 7th grade student at Williamsburg Middle School in Arlington, Virginia. And then in the senior division, we'd like to give an honorable mention to Miko Brooks, a 10th grade student at Nathan Hale High School in Seattle, Washington. Yes. Okay, and then getting into our top 2 winners, we'll start with the junior division. So in the 2nd place, I'm excited to announce Emmeline Henriquez, a 7th grade student from the Arts and Communication Magnet Academy in Beaverton, Oregon, is our 2nd place winner. And in 1st place, Morgan Salvo, also from the Arts and Communication Magnet Academy in Beaverton, Oregon. Yes, congratulations in the junior division. And then moving on into our senior division, these are high school students or equivalent age ranges. Second place, Evie Chan of Oregon Episcopal School in Portland, Oregon. And in first place, congratulations to Saya Tipton, a 10th grader from Grant High School in Portland, Oregon. Congratulations. Yes. Congratulations to all of our winners this year. And again, thank you to all the contestants who participated. If you haven't had a chance, we will actually also run circle the different art pieces up on the screen again at the end of our program. So please stay if you have a chance to just look at the different artwork. It really is very inspiring to see what our students have produced. So this year we also offered a new award, the Educator Engagement Award. And this is in recognition of an outstanding educator who encouraged students to participate in the contest. So the school with the most contestants this year was the Arts and Communication Magnet Academy in Beaverton, Oregon. And we'd like to congratulate Emily Thackeray on achieving this Educator Engagement Award. I think Emily is here. Is Emily here today? Oh, yes. Great. Thank you for coming. Wonderful. Yes. We're really excited to be able to honor an educator who really helps encourage students. So again, thank you, Emily, for being here, and congratulations again. So lastly, I need to thank those who really brought this contest to life this year. So I want to give a huge thank you to our planning committee, Kate Wexler, Cynthia Basie, Alyssa Dingus, who are all actually here today. I definitely want to give a big shout out to them. Thank you for all of your work. And then Logan Pinard, who isn't able to make it in person today because he is currently living in Vancouver, BC. But Logan was a former student contest contestant and continues to be part of our planning committee. So thank you, Logan, who's probably watching this online. And then I also want to take a moment to thank all of our 17 judges who volunteered this year to evaluate all of our contest entries. Many have judged our contest year after year, and they're really, this contest, like MIN's, the Minoru Yasui Legacy Project, is volunteer run. So it really does take a village to run this contest, and we're so grateful to have the help of everyone who was involved. So thank you to our 17 judges this year. Yeah, and that being said, if any students or community members out there are interested in getting involved, please feel free to reach out to us after the program, or reach out to us on our website. But with that, just thank you, everyone, and I hope you do get a chance to see some of the artwork later today.
Thank you, Julian. I know Holly is smiling, looking down on us now to see that art has been used as a way of honoring the legacy of her father. We are now coming towards the end, and Barbara Yasui is a Seattle educator and activist who grew up in Portland as a part of the Sansei generation of the Yasui family. We just saw her father, Dr. Homer Yasui, on his last Matsutake hunt. And Barbara's commitment to justice is currently as a leader in the Seattle chapter of Tsuru for Solidarity. And she's going to give us our call to action.
Thank you, Sharon. So you've all seen our theme for today is advancing democracy in the face of current threats. And so we aren't going to just let you sit here and listen to us talk about advancing democracy. We want you, each one of you to take a step to do something to do it, because we want democracy not only to survive, but to thrive. So as you came in, or if you don't have one yet, please be sure to pick up one of these tags. They're over there. And what we want you to do is, after listening to people talk and thinking about what's happening in your own community, to take at least one step, write down on the tag something that you personally are going to do to advance democracy. And once you've done that, if you'll be, we invite you to join us at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, which is just a few blocks from here. And if you are going there, when you get there, go to my Uncle Min's jail cell. It's a really cool exhibit. And we're going to tie these on to the bars of his jail cell. Or if you're not going there, there's a box over on the table where you can leave your tags. And so please join us in taking action to advance democracy. And I just want to leave you with my own personal anecdote of Uncle Min. And so he lived in Denver and I lived in Portland, and so I wouldn't see him very often, but every few summers he and my Aunt Tsuru would drive across the country with their 3 girls, who were my cousins, in the back of their station wagon. And in those days, kids didn't wear seatbelts. We'd just be loose in the back of the station wagon. We have our sleeping bags and our comic books. Anyway, my cousins would come and visit, and we always had a great time together. But I remember so distinctly Uncle Min, he'd say, "Come here, Barbie." He always called me Barbie. Only person who could get away with that. But he would sit me on his lap, and I noticed that he had one fingernail on his pinky finger was very long. It was so long, it curved under, and it was like really kind of creepy as a little kid. And I said to him, "Uncle Min, why is your fingernail so long?" And he said, "That's because when I was in the Multnomah County Jail for 9 months, they would not let me cut my fingernails. And so my fingernails grew that long. And so I've always kept that one fingernail that long to remind me of the time that I was in solitary confinement." And he said, "Barbie, I want you to remember that you are born into this world to make it a better place." And I will never forget him telling me that. And he apparently told lots of people that, because I've seen that written, a famous quote of his. So I would say to all of you, you were all born into this world to make it a better place. So what can you do today to advance democracy? And I'm going to turn it over to Sharon for our final comments.
I don't think I can make final comments to that. I remember that long fingernail too, and I also thought it was very creepy, but I didn't ask him why. I didn't have the wherewithal to ask him why. I want to thank Representative Khanh, Pham, for really not only the work that you've done, but how you melded together what Minoru Yasui stood for all these years and your own work today. And thank you so much. It was very, very powerful. Also like to thank the panelists, Becca, Asaki, Amy Herzfeld-Copple, and Paul Susi, for their very divergent comments and presentations about working at the organizational level, working on the ground at the grassroots level. And it's a reminder to all of us that we can do something regardless of who we are. I have a friend who's very shy and will not participate in politics, but she is the fastest data entry person I've ever seen in my life. And every year she volunteers on the ballot issue or campaign of her choice, and she sits at home and enters all the data, all the information for what's going on, and that's her contribution. So there's no excuse for not being able to contribute something. I'd also like to finally acknowledge and appreciate all the sponsors and presenters again, the families of Shizuko and Masuo Yasui, the Chop Yasui Fund of the Gorge Community Foundation, the University of Oregon for its support in providing the venue, the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, which we are invited to go to immediately following this, and the Minoru Yasui Legacy Project. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the Minoru Yasui Legacy Project Steering Committee, Janet Hamada, Weston Koyama, Lynn Fuchigami Parks, Julian Tada, Hanako Wakatsuki Chong, Maya Yasui, Peggy Nagai, Carol Suzuki, Bill Waterman, Barbara Yasui, and Ashley Baca for their work to make this event possible. So please join us at JAMO 411 Northwest Flanders Street. I'm a little turned around about where we are in Portland, but it's just a few blocks from here. And you can see Min's jail cell, which is a very powerful image to end the day with, and also to put your tags on the bars of the cell. There's also an exhibit there about Bob Shimabukuro, who was an activist, journalist, woodworker, chef, restaurant owner, many other things. But relevant to today, he is the author of the book Born in Seattle, The Movement for Japanese American Redress. And that exhibit ends next week. So it'll be a chance to do that as well. And finally, thank you again for caring about advancing democracy. May we all work to make democracies thrive. And to paraphrase the late Congressman John Lewis, let's get busy doing good. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Let's get into good trouble. Thank you very much.